You awoke with the weight of the sun pressing softly through the narrow window, its pale, filtered light making the world seem washed in fragile shades of gold and gray. The air was thick with the dry scent of fine sand and polished stones, a subtle graininess that settled deep into your lungs alongside the faint whisper of moss and old wood carried on a gentle breeze. Beneath you, the rough tatami mat rubbed against your skin, worn but steady, grounding you in the stillness of this ancient chamber. Your fingers curled tightly around the bamboo rake's handle, the familiar grip steady yet burdened by exhaustion, as you repeated the endless motion practiced relentless hours before, dragging the tool slowly, carving winding lines into the sand that seemed to erase themselves almost as soon as they were made. Each patient sweep felt like an attempt to order chaos, to impose calm on the restless surface, though the shifting wind constantly blurred and softened your work's delicate curves. A distant bell tolled, its slow, meditative chime echoing through the wooden walls and mingling with the faint rustle of leaves beyond the garden's border. The stone you faced, solitary and unyielding amidst the raked sand, offered no response to the beads of sweat tracing silent paths down your heated cheeks. A single misstep, a hesitant stroke, could mean more than failure. It might summon unseen doom. Within this quiet courtyard, torment wove itself into every grain, every line drawn with weary precision, transforming the barren surface into an unforgiving landscape for your heavy spirit. Outside, the pale blue light of early winter cooled the village beyond the garden's walls, silencing dogs and dimming the distant chatter of waking neighbors. You noticed the faint cracking of frost beneath your cautious steps, the cold air crisp against your threadbare cloak, contrasting with the thick warmth clinging to your back as you turned once more to your task. Life here was stripped to essentials, much like now, navigating this endless garden, where simplicity disguised a labyrinthine test of patience and spirit. If today's world found unbearable the cruel ill-timing of a dead battery, imagine there, in this fading realm, the slow dread that came from watching your last piece of firewood turn to ash beneath a harsh, indifferent moon. Each morning opened with the fragile hope of warmth, hearts briefly kindling around communal fires, sharing the quiet heat that held back the creeping cold. You remembered the glow, the soft crackle of burning branches, a whispered promise that relief might be close before the inevitable return to the garden's stone-clad silence and your steady hand's tireless chore. The steady rhythm of rake on sand became a mantra, a slow breath held against the creeping fatigue and lingering fear. Then suddenly, a shift. The usual barking ceased, as if the village itself held its breath. Through the misted window, your eyes caught a fleeting exchange. Neighbors, gazes locking with a sharpness that pierced the muted dawn. Something unseen stirred beneath the calm surface, A subtle tension whispered between shadows. Whatever awaited beyond the garden's edge, you could feel it drawing near, quiet but relentless, like the slow unraveling of a thread pulled taut. Hey, before Morpheus takes you for good, quickly check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next bedtime stories. Take the chance to leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You rose slowly, the lingering ache in your shoulders a muted reminder of the countless hours spent tracing those shifting lines in the sand. The fragile light deepened, casting shadows that stretched like slow-moving ghosts along the polished wooden floor beneath your feet. Each breath you took was dense with the scents of dried wood and the faint metallic tinge of old stone warmed by the sun's reluctant rise. Your hands trembled faintly as you laid down the bamboo rake, the textured handle cool against your palms, a momentary reprieve from the steady pressure that had begun to settle deep beneath your ribs. Outside the chamber, the garden breathed in quiet murmurs, leaves whispering secrets only the wind dared to carry. You stepped forward, your bare feet meeting the floor with a delicate press, each movement slow, measured, as if the slightest rush might unravel the fragile calm you had carved for yourself. The air was thin, cooler now, where the frost had yet to fully yield, and the faint crunch beneath your steps felt amplified in the hallowed stillness. You approached the stone once more, its presence heavier than before, an immovable sentinel marked by time's unyielding hand. The sharp edges caught the light unevenly, shadows falling across its surface in jagged slivers, offering no hint of welcome. Your fingers brushed the roughness. At its base, each grain unforgiving beneath your skin. It was a silent challenge, this stone, a block of stubbornness that resisted every effort to be tamed or understood. The cold seeped slowly into your fingers, stirring the muscles to tense. A quiet echo of the fear lurking beneath your deliberate actions. You reached out, tracing a careful curve in the sand beside the rock, the grains slipping reluctantly from your touch, as though the earth itself conspired to erase your work. The rake's handle fit snugly in your grasp again, the simple rhythm of dragging it, steady and unforgiving. A slow wind stirred, carrying with it the faint smoke of distant fires from the village, a smoky sweetness that contrasted with the damp earth odors clinging to your cloak. You inhaled deeply, drawing the warmth and the coolness. Together, a fragile balance against the encroaching numbness. The sound of distant footsteps, muffled and hesitant, wove through the cold air. Neighbors perhaps venturing out, their movements cautious and deliberate, like your own. With each sweep, you became more attuned to the subtle imperfections that marked your progress. The slight rise of a grain cluster that refused to lie flat. The miniature ridges where the sand betrayed a subtle shift in moisture. Your gaze lifted now and then to the edges of the courtyard, where the bare branches of ancient trees twined like brittle fingers against the dull sky. Motionless sentinels themselves, but distant crow's call rippled through the quiet, its harsh note stark against the slow unfolding day. The garden seemed suspended, caught between night's retreat and day's advance, holding its breath as if awaiting your next move. ... You adjusted your footing, careful to suppress the faint shiver that rose along your spine. The task was repetitive, exhausting, a meditation of minute precision and patience. Yet beneath that repetition, an unease lingered, threading through your thoughts like the series of soft, insistent taps on a fragile door. As you knelt beside the stone again, your fingers hesitated over the sand, the tendrils of frost at the garden's edges glinting faintly now with the pale light. The slow beating of your heart marked time, each thump a call to vigilance. A slight rustle caught your attention, too deliberate to be wind. You turned your head, eyes narrowing, catching the nearly imperceptible motion of a shadow shifting just beyond the rim of the garden wall. A breath escaped you, shallow and silent. The familiar rhythm of the rake was broken, for a heartbeat as a cold tendril of anxiety curled low in your belly. You reminded yourself of the routine, steady, slow, patience above all else. The shadows held no shape yet, but their presence was undeniable. A soft tension rising like the tide beneath the surface. You obscured your breath behind your folded hands and paused, the breeze brushing past you with the faint scent of pine and distant smoke. The garden silence thickened, wrapping you in its careful stillness. You dared not move quickly, knowing the smallest sound might unravel the fragile boundary you'd so carefully maintained. Time stretched, measured only by the dragging of the rake. Through the sand once more, the lines you carved deeper and more deliberate now. The sharp tang of cold metal against stone reached your senses as your hand brushed the edge of the iron trowel tucked at your belt, an object of safety and solemn promise, carried more for peace of mind than hope of use. Behind you, the distant village remained quiet, the faint glow of early morning fires casting a warm hue against pale walls, a reminder of life continuing beyond these stone confines. You allowed yourself a moment's glance toward the horizon, where gray clouds meandered slowly, breaking between fading stars. A slight warmth blossomed across your face, soft as a secret held just out of reach. Your gaze flickered back to the shadow lingering at the garden's limit, now clearer but still indistinct, a silhouette blending with the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had come. The slow pulse of unease pressed inwards, yet beneath it, A fragile thread of resolve tightened. With a breath drawn, slow and deliberate, you lifted the bamboo rake again, fingers curling firmly around the smooth handle. You began tracing new lines in the sand, each stroke slower than before, almost reverent, mindful of the lingering presence watching silently beyond the garden stones. A presence that refused to be disregarded or forgotten. And as your hand moved, the faintest sound, soft, deliberate, like a whisper, grazed the edge of the courtyard. A message carried not in words, but in the hesitating fall of a single leaf. You froze for a moment, breath held tight as your eyes scanned the edge of the garden once more. The shadow dissolved quietly, curling back into the skeletal branches where it had begun, vanishing like smoke into the pale morning light. Yet the residue of that silent presence lingered, a cold ripple beneath your skin that pressed gently against patience's fragile barrier. You shifted slowly, deliberately, feeling the rough wood of the floor beneath your soles, a steady reminder of the stillness you needed to conserve. The air had turned thinner, colder, the last fragments of frost glittering faintly like fractured glass along the stone rim. A vague rustle to your left made your spine tighten, and you turned with care. Beyond the garden's border, the naked limbs of trees tangled together like whispered secrets, their brittle twigs scratching softly against one another. Somewhere in that quiet wilderness, faint footsteps echoed, soft but uneven, hesitant and unreadable. You held your breath again, ears attuned not just to sound, but to all the spaces between, where silence threatened to swell and break. Your fingers closed once more around the bamboo rake, its familiar weight a comfort and a chain, binding you to the slow, unyielding task you were charged to perform. The grip was worn to smoothness in places, a faint warmth transferring to your skin, despite the chill drifting in. With an almost reverent slowness, you lifted the tool and began to trace long, winding lines in the sand, your strokes deliberate, your movements a meditation on subtlety and restraint. The grains shifted beneath you like water frozen momentarily, line blurring as the wind teased the edges, softening all edges until the design became a quiet murmur against the stone's stolid presence. The stone lay immovable, its surface rough and ancient, demanding respect, yet offering no answers. Your palm brushed the cold surface absently, grounding yourself in the solidity as the tension crept slowly back into your limbs. There was an unsettling beauty in this routine, a fragile dance between control and surrender, between movement and stillness. A whisper flickered in the air, a scent of smoke carried faintly across the garden, mingling with the earth's damp musk and the brittle fragrance of frost-tinged pine. You drew in the smoky sweetness, letting it mingle with the chill inside your lungs, a delicate warmth that fought the creeping numbness. Behind you, the faint sounds of the village persisted like brittle threads. An occasional muffled cough, the distant clatter of pots, the soft murmur of voices awakening to another muted day. Yet here, within this enclosure, time seemed almost suspended, measured only by the patient scrape of rake on sand and the slow, steady pulse in your veins. Your gaze drifted toward the sky, a fragile canvas of graying clouds stretched thin and pale. As the dawn light grew stronger, the dull glow threaded through the skeletal branches, casting shifting patterns of shadow and silver along the courtyard floor. You felt the weight of those shadows press in, a slow tightening around your awareness, as if the garden itself held a breathless vigil. Once more, a soft sound pricked your senses, a leaf falling, drifting slowly down like a hesitant thought, skimming the ground, barely a foot from your trembling fingers. The fragile flutter sent a ripple through your focus, and you paused, the rake hovering gently above the sand. For one lingering moment, the world was still, as if listening. You lowered the rake with trembling reverence, sliding your hands across the worn handle before releasing it to rest beside you. The cold pressed deeper now, threading through your skin and nestling beneath your ribs. You wrapped your arms around yourself, feeling the threadbare cloak pull tight against the growing chill. The garden's silence deepened once more, settling around you like a dense fog. Then, faint beyond the garden wall, an almost imperceptible creak echoed, like the sigh of old wood stretched thin by years and cold nights. Your head turned sharply, eyes narrowing into the dim light. Along the far edge of the courtyard, where the moss thickened into a darkened, verdant seam against the stone, a soft shape moved with deliberate slowness. It was a figure, cloaked and shifting, gliding almost without sound, merging with the shadows as effortlessly as smoke disappears into the wind. You felt the space between you tense like a drawn bowstring, an unspoken understanding tracing a fragile line beneath the quiet. Time seemed to stretch impossibly, the breath held not just in your chest, but in the very air around you. Your fingers twitched toward the iron trowel at your belt, the cold metal promising a silent defense, a shard of protection amidst uncertainty. Yet still you remained still, anchored by the slow march of your breath, by the measured rhythms that had carried you through endless dawns like this. The figure paused at the edge, an intangible presence folded into the garden's secret folds. The faint scent of pine and smoke curled faintly through the air between you, mingling with the crisp bite of frost. Then, without a sound or swift move, the figure simply dissolved, folding back into the shadowed branches, leaving behind only the whispered echo of something half-remembered, a promise suspended. You exhaled softly, a breath carried lightly as the last. Tendrils of tension slipped away, replaced by a fragile, simmering thread of resolve. The garden awaited your next slow, deliberate mark. The lines yet to be drawn that might tell a story only silence could speak. And as your fingers closed firmly around the bamboo rake once more, a single fragile petal drifted quietly down from the trees, swirling in the cold air before resting gently at your feet. Its vivid red, a sudden flare against the muted garden, a secret left behind in the slow, unfolding quiet. You knelt again by the stone's heavy base, fingertips grazing the sharp ridges, the cold pressing a slow fire beneath your skin. The garden held its breath. The silence folded tight around you like a second skin, and every breath you exhaled rippled softly through the thin morning air. The faint rustling of frost-laden leaves whispered close, so subtle it felt almost imagined. Your fingers curled tightly around the rake's handle once more, the worn bamboo warm now from your touch, and you began. Slowly, you carved wide arcs into the sand, each groove a deliberate stroke that traced the edge of calm you fought to preserve. Outside the walls, the village murmured beneath its fragile dawn, but here, beyond the moss-lined perimeter, the world was tempered, a fragile peace held suspended in time. The scent of distant smoke drifted in, a faint sweetness mingled with damp earth and the lingering bite of frost. You inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill your lungs fully before releasing it slowly, like a soft sigh barely escaping. Your gaze drifted upward through the skeletal branches, twisted against the muted sky, shadows pooling like slow stains on the courtyard floor. The stone remained immovable, unyielding as the centuries that cast it here. Each line you raked unfolded patiently, a slow dance where your fingers and the sand shared secrets, and the wind wove whispers among the fading frost. A faint stir caught at the edge of your hearing, a dry crackle of twigs crushed beneath cautious steps. You paused, breath held, and your eyes flicked toward the fragmented shadow, gliding silently beneath the trees beyond the wall. Its shape was blurred, indistinct, a slow ripple folding into the gray light. The weight of waiting wrapped over your shoulders like a cold shroud. Your hand tightened on the rake's handle, knuckles paling, the metal trowel at your side suddenly heavier in your thoughts. The figure moved with a deliberate slowness, as if reluctant to break. The fragile stillness you both inhabited. You swallowed the rising tension, forcing your body to remain as steady as the granite stone, focusing instead on the grains of sand yielding against your tool. The intricacies of texture tangled beneath the growing warmth of the morning sun. The roughness of grit, the softened edges where wind brushed relentlessly. Each line was a soft echo of a heartbeat, measured and steady. The figure hesitated at the border, head bowing slightly like a whispered question, but no sound came, only the faint scent of smoke curling lazily on the wind, a hint of pine, threading delicate through the cold. You let the trowel rest still at your belt, resisting the impulse to draw it definitively. Instead, you turned your attention back to the sand. Your fingers brushed lightly over the curves you had traced, feeling the tiny ridges where uneven grains resisted smoothness. The ritual itself was a fortress against the unknown, the garden a sacred boundary, the silent stone your immovable companion. Behind you, far off, the village's breath stirred faintly, the clink of a distant pot, muted voices threading through the cold air. Here, though, time slowed to a whispered cadence, each moment like a stone dropped into still water, rippling gently outward and fading. The sky above grew clear in streaks between drifting clouds. Soft ribbons of pale blue stretched across the horizon, the light deepening tenderly, like a promise held just beyond reach. A gentle warmth blossomed slowly along your cheeks, but the cool air clung like a thin veil, a reminder of the slow approaching evening chill. You lifted the rake again, drawing long, meticulous lines that spiraled closer around the stone's base. With each sweep, you imagined the invisible threads tying you to this place, threads of patience, worn thin, yet unbroken. The sand shifted beneath your touch like a living thing, moving reluctantly, as if reluctant to hold to order. Suddenly, a faint scrape sounded near the garden's edge, the slow fall of dry leaves brushing stone. You froze, breath caught quietly in the low hollow of your chest. The shadows there flickered uncertainly, and beneath the garden's mossy rim, the figure stirred once more. It moved with a fluid hesitation, part of the mist-shadowed trees, its presence melding seamlessly with the quiet. You felt time stretch impossibly long, every second unfolding with the weight of unsaid things pressing close. The taut chord of silence vibrated softly in your nerves, a fragile line poised to break or hold. Without turning, your hand drifted carefully toward the trowel, its cold promise grounding your swirling thoughts. But you did not grasp it. Instead, you cupped your hands together, enclosing a small warmth between your palms, and returned your focus to the slow undulation of sand beneath the rake's edge. The figure lingered just beyond clear sight, like dark pulse folded into the winter's brittle breath. Then, as if unwilling to settle the thin air with presence, it receded, dissolving as quietly as smoke scattering on a breeze. Stillness reclaimed the courtyard, though now laced with a fragile tension tighter than before. The garden seemed to pulse faintly with remembered footsteps, the soft sigh of branches swaying gently overhead. You exhaled fully, the air cool and thin as it escaped, and as you settled the rake quietly, beside you, a vivid red petal drifted down, swirling steadily in the chilled light before landing softly at your feet. Its color bloomed suddenly against the muted earth, a sharp secret left hovering in the silence. Your gaze locked on that single, stubborn flame of red, feeling the slow shift beneath your skin, the uneasy knowing that the garden's quiet was not complete, not yet. From the edges of your vision, the faintest movement stirred once more. Beyond sight, deeper among the gnarled branches, something waited, patient, watching. And you knew your slow steps forward would have to meet it again. You remained motionless for a long beat, the fleeting red petal resting quietly at your feet, seeming to pulse faintly with its own secret life. The muted light around you deepened, shadows bending and folding into the corners of the courtyard as the chill of the approaching day thickened like a gathering sigh. The air, delicate and thin, pressed softly against your skin, carrying with it the faintest resonance of a breath just beyond reach. Slowly, your hand closed once more around the bamboo rake, its weight a familiar comfort anchoring you to this fragile moment. Your fingers tightened, pressing gently into the smooth handle, as if drawing strength from the simple, repetitive motion that had come to define your days within this silent garden. The endless patterns you carved into the sand were less about the design and more about the act itself, a meditation of patience, a slow defiance against the creeping unease nesting deep beneath your ribs. With a deliberate, measured sweep, you traced a broad arc in the sand, feeling each grain slip reluctantly. Beneath the rake's edge, yielding to your will only with the softest, hesitant crunch, the sound was muted in the vast quiet, a gentle murmur that seemed to ripple outward, touching the cold stone and the brittle branches alike. Your gaze lifted slowly to the tall garden walls, the moss-darkened surfaces holding the faint residue of dusk's retreat. They seemed, in their own way, both fortress and prison. The red petal remained stubbornly in place, a vivid shrine amid the muted gray. It stirred slightly as a careful breath swept low beneath the trees, the movement gentle enough to suggest the touch of a whisper. You looked toward the border again. The shadow from before had vanished, but the silence it left behind was dense and expectant, like the first tremble before a storm's breath. Your feet pressed softly against the worn wooden floor as you shifted position, toes curling slowly into the cool grain. A thin mist began to rise, curling like smoke along the edges of the courtyard, wrapping the stones and the bare roots of the ancient trees in a translucent veil. The scent of damp earth surfaced anew, mingling with the sharp, pine-tinged smoke that drifted across the cold air, a small reassurance from the distant fires still living beyond the village walls. Fingers brushing absently along the handle, you found your rhythm again, drawing careful, elongated lines spiraling around the solitary stone at the garden's center. Each motion was slow and reverent, a quiet invocation whispered in the language of sand and stone. Your mind sharpened not with clarity, but with a tense watchfulness. Each tiny irregularity in the sand, a potential sign. Each sudden crackle of falling leaf or shifting twig, a call to stillness. A distant bell tolled, a low, sonorous tone that seemed to seep through the frozen air and settle into your chest. It was a slow, steady mark of time's passage, urging you forward, even as the cold wound tighter along your spine. The garden, suspended between stillness and the swift turn of day, held you in its careful embrace. Your breath came slower now, drawn deep and steady like waves upon a distant shore. The faint, warming blossom along your cheeks endured, a gentle pulse against the pervasive chill. Beneath your cloak, the sharp edge of the trowel lay heavy, a quiet promise and a reminder. Your fingers twitched toward it, hesitated, and withdrew, as if knowing that this moment was not yet a reckoning, but rather a waiting. Outside, life murmured quietly beyond the garden. Soft voices, the distant clatter of morning routines. But within these walls, sound was a fragile thread, easily broken. Every whisper of bristle, every soft fall of frost-laden leaf, wove itself into the fabric of your care. Another sweep of the rake carved deeper grooves now, spiraling tighter. The grain shifted with a hushed resistance, folding under your hand like reluctant confession. The stone's jagged silhouette cast a long, fractured shadow, and for a moment you felt the weight of time pressing down, an unspoken demand for endurance and vigilance. Then, suddenly, from beyond the garden's rim, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The brittle branches quivered gently, and a soft movement glided low, just beneath the boundary of sight. The figure returned, cloaked once more in shadow, but now more defined, its presence both watching and waiting in patient silence. Your heart slowed, not from fear, but from a long-acquired discipline, a steady grace. The trowel at your belt hummed faintly against your movements, a cold steadiness below the surface of your awareness. Yet you did not reach for it. Instead, your hand swept the rake one last time in a wide, slow arc, the sand whispering beneath your touch as the garden held its breath around you. A single breath escaped, mingling with the chilly air, and the figure on the edge of the courtyard tilted its head slightly, a gesture almost human, almost frail, as if it too felt the long weight of waiting. Then, without warning or movement, it dissolved, a quiet unraveling, like mist drifting back into darkness. The garden exhaled, a long, soft silence. But in that silence, your eyes caught something, a flicker of crimson amid the pale stones, a second red petal, falling slow and deliberate, caught midair by a stray breath of wind, destined to land not far from where the first still rested. And you knew, with a certainty that settled cold and deep, that this was no accident. The slow unraveling had begun anew. You knelt slowly, the chill settling deeper into the bones of the garden, its quiet breathing weaving through the skeletal branches overhead. The red petal rested at your feet, stubborn and vivid against the scattering frost and muted stones, a lone flame flickering in the softened gray. You swallowed the cold air deliberately, feeling it fill your lungs with a brittle sharpness that sparked every nerve awake. Your fingers closed around the bamboo. Rake once more, its familiar weight grounding you. The handle was smooth and steady, the subtle warmth from your touch spreading slowly upward as you drew it gently along the sand. Each grain slipped beneath the edge, reluctant yet yielding, like water hesitant to give way to a stone. The sound was a soft, rasping murmur that held the space between breaths and time itself. Above, the thin veil of mist softened the garden's outlines, the ancient trees blurring into shadows that drifted dreamlike. Frost clung to the mossy rim of the courtyard with the quiet perseverance of an old wound. Somewhere beyond, faint voices stirred, a whisper of life edged with caution. But here, you remained suspended, tethered only by the steady rhythm of sand yielding beneath your patient hands. The solitary stone stood unmoving at the center, its jagged form catching fractured light in harsh slivers. You traced slow arcs around its base, the lines curling delicately like slow breaths, weaving a silence thick with remembered fears and unspoken questions. The wind shifted, carrying hints of pine smoke and damp earth, infusing the cold with a fragile warmth that clung softly at the edges of your senses. A distant bell tolled low, deep and sonorous, stretching through the still air and lingering long after the fading clang. It marked the moment like a pulse, a reminder of relentless time pressing downward, yet offering no answers. Your gaze lifted to the sky, fractured by swollen clouds, slowly peeling apart to reveal slivers of pale morning blue. Light sifted through, washing the courtyard floor in gentle ribbons that danced slowly over the frost-crusted stones. Behind you, the faintest crunch of footsteps nudged the quiet, tentative and uneven, as if unsure of their welcome. You did not look, but the tremor ran cold along your spine, a taut thread tightening softly against nerves worn raw with vigilance. Your thumb traced the worn grooves on the rake's handle, a tactile anchor amid the invisible currents stirring around the garden's edge. The shadow returned, slipping like liquid dusk through the brittle limbs on the far side. Its presence folded tightly into the mist and frost. It paused, the figure's form just perceptible, a silent question hanging between the branches. The soft scent of pine and smoke wove through the air again, deeper now, mingled with cold earth and the faintest hint of something older, a long memory pressed beneath the centuries. No sudden movements followed. Instead, time seemed to slow even. Further, each heartbeat pulsing like a distant drum in your chest. You exhaled quietly, breath threading through the cold, deliberate as the slow curves drawn beneath your hands. The metallic chill of the trowel at your belt pressed a subtle weight against your side, a muted promise held steady and silent. Yet you did not grasp it, choosing instead to meet the waiting with stillness, letting the tension ebb and flow like a tide kept in fragile balance. Your focus drew back to the sand, each grain resisting and then succumbing to your insistence. The delicate ridges you carved wove a tapestry of patience and persistence, faint shadows playing along the grooves like whispered secrets. The garden held you in its careful solitude, a sanctuary of slow resolve and tender watchfulness. A sudden breeze fluttered past, stirring the dry leaves along the path, sending the red petal into a slow spiral. It drifted and twirled, carried with a soft grace, before finally settling again. Its vivid hue, a sharp contrast to the muted tones around you. The petal's loneliness echoed within you, a fragile symbol of endurance, holding fast amid creeping isolation. Beyond the garden's boundary, the murmur of the waking village mingled with a thin, polished chill. An owl's faint, distant cry rippled through the thinning darkness, a sound as old and patient as the stone itself. You closed your eyes briefly, tasting the cold mix of night's retreat and day's slow emergence. A fragile balance struck in this space between moments. When your eyes opened, the shadow had shifted slightly, now merged with the tangle of branches in a way that almost seemed deliberate, like a ghost woven into the fabric of the garden's breath. You felt it watching, patient and unreadable. A presence folded into the silence as deeply as the frost into the earth. Your hand tightened around the rake, the familiar grip steady despite the tension threading its way through your nerves. The sun climbed higher, filtering through the mist with a muted glow that softened the edges of everything it touched. A subtle warmth blossomed gently on your face, fleeting as a whispered promise before the cold reclaimed its hold. You traced one long, deliberate line that spiraled ever closer around the stone's base, the grains whispering their reluctant surrender beneath the bamboo blade. And then, just as the rhythm settled, a tiny shift, barely a breath, echoed through the garden. The shadow flickered once more at the edge of vision. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, a single faint figure detached from the dark folds of branches and stepped forward into the pale light, silhouette outlined softly against the drifting mist. You held your breath, every sense taut, the garden's fragile balance poised on the edge of unfolding, ready to surrender its deepest secret, or to close tightly once again. And in that slow, trembling moment, the world went quiet, waiting for the next slow turn. You settled your weight onto the smooth tatami once more, the fabric's softened threads pressing faintly against the backs of your knees. Outside, the garden's breath slowed in the still, thin air. Frost shimmered dimly along the edges of stone paths and twisted roots, delicate as the wings of a chilled moth. Your fingers wrapped tightly around the bamboo rake, its cool surface steady. Beneath your palms, the familiar heft grounding you against the restless pulse beneath your ribs. The red petal lay stubborn at your feet, a bright spark scribed against gray frost, a small defiance in the muted shadows. You dared not disturb it, letting it hold its quiet vigil, even as the wind whispered low through brittle branches overhead. A faint scent of smoke wove through the air, mingling with the damp cold of earth and the lonely bite of pine. The scent lingered, gentle and persistent, settling deep in your lungs, alongside the familiar ache of waiting and stillness. Your gaze drifted upward, tracing the skeletal lines of ancient trees, brittle, delicate, yet resolute against the pale wash of morning light. The clouds peeled apart slowly, revealing slivers of fragile blue that bled softly into the hollow sky. Somewhere beyond the garden's rim, a crow's harsh call cracked the silence, sharp against the slow rhythm of your breath and the faint scrape of the rake against sand. You began your motion again, deliberate and unhurried. Each sweep traced a languid curve, grains yielding reluctantly beneath the bamboo's edge. The sound muted and tentative, as if the sand whispered secrets meant only for your ears. The lines spiraled outward, wide arcs embracing the stone's jagged base, weaving a mantle of quiet yet resolute order over the shifting canvas. A shiver crawled along your spine as a subtle movement caught your attention, a flicker at the garden's edge, barely there, like breath on chilled glass. The shadow you had seen before lingered beyond the wall, folding into the mist like smoke curling upward from a dying ember. It did not advance, but its presence stretched, a silent thread binding the garden's stillness with something ancient and unreadable. Your fingers clenched briefly around the rake, the warmth of your touch a fragile barrier against the cold that pressed closer now. The stone was indifferent, an unmoving sentinel that bore its weight with impossible patience. Your palm brushed its cold surface absently, grounding you as the tension unwound slowly in your muscles, leaving a hollow resonance behind your ribs. The wind shifted softly, coaxing dry leaves into hesitant dance, their rustling weaving faint harmonies with the distant toll of a bell. The tone echoed through the hollow spaces, low and sonorous, a heartbeat threading through the fragile fabric of dawn. You inhaled deeply, tracing the smoky pine scent, mingling with damp stone, letting the air fill your lungs and ease the tight coil of nerves tucked beneath your ribs. Your eyes trace the winding lines you had drawn, marveling at their slow dance. Each ridge and trough, a whispered imprint of your presence, a patient defiance against the quiet unraveling. The garden was a silent poem, its verses carved in shifting grains that softened beneath your touch, like fading memories. A faint warmth blossomed behind your temples, as if the gentle promise of the sun was reaching past the cold, binding fragile hope to the day's slow unfolding. Just then, a muted scrape drew your attention again to the border. The shadow shifted once more, its slow, fluid motion wrapped in the diminished light, a silhouette stitched from mist and cold decay. You dared not move quickly, holding your breath in cautious stillness. The faint scent of smoke curled richer now, threading delicately among the pine and frost, a whispered thread connecting the figure to the garden's ancient bones. You felt your fingers twitch toward the iron trowel nested at your belt, a cold promise, bare and silent. The weight pressed quietly against your side, a reminder held steady beneath your skin. But your hands stilled, retreating slowly as you folded your palms together, pressing warmth into your skin, choosing patience over sudden action. The figure hesitated, almost fragile, its head bowing slightly in a motion unspoken, uninvited, yet laden with meaning. Time seemed to suspend, the garden holding its breath in the fragile gap between presence and absence. The faint warmth on your cheeks deepened, fleeting yet poignant, lending a soft glow to the slow fold of shadows cast by skeletal limbs. A thin spiral of smoke drifted low as the figure withdrew, melting into the frost-bitten folds of branches and stone. Silence distilled itself once again, lingering as a tangible weight that settled across the cold air. Your breath escaped softly, a slow exhale tracing a fragile path through the stillness. You lowered the rake beside you carefully, the sound muted but final. The red petal remained, vivid and unwavering, an ember in the gray expanse. Your gaze locked on it, heart tightening with an unease tempered by resolve. The garden's quiet was fractured now, a careful balance teetering on the edge of an unfolding mystery no longer distant. From the periphery of shadowed branches, a faint crack whispered, a delicate sound like a promise or a warning. You felt eyes upon you, silent and steady, watching through the thinning light. The long wait had not ended. It had merely turned a slow corner into the unknown. And as the sun fell behind a veiling mist, casting the courtyard in a softened twilight, the figure's silhouette re-emerged, steady, watching, bearing the weight of secrets yet to speak. You remained still, the lingering chill seeping slowly into your bones as the courtyard held its quiet breath. The red petal at your feet, vivid and unyielding, seemed to pulse with a silent flame against the muted stone, a stubborn ember amid frost's pale veil. Your hands tightened briefly around the bamboo rake, drawing a faint warmth to your skin, a fragile tether to this frozen moment, suspended between absence and presence. The soft mist curled through the ancient trees, their brittle limbs bending slightly under the weight of unseen frost. Shadows folded in with slow inevitability, draping the garden like a fragile shroud. You allowed your eyes to roam the quiet edges again, drawn to the dense tangle of branches where the figure had vanished. There was a tenderness in the empty space, a waiting woven into the stillness, dense as the cold air pressing softly against your cheeks. A breath, slow and deliberate, escaped your lips. You raised the rake once more, fingers curling with a reverence learned in long hours of solitude. The grains shuddered faintly beneath the bamboo edge, yielding reluctantly but obedient to your touch. With each deliberate sweep, you traced ancient, winding spirals around the stone's heavy base, patterns unfolding like whispered prayers carved in sand and silence. The soft rustle of leaves stirred again, tentative yet purposeful. Your gaze flickered to the garden's periphery, where frost glittered faintly in dawn's softened light. The crisp air carried the faint scent of pine embers, mingling with the sharpness of cold stone and damp earth. A reminder of the world beyond these walls, and the slow pulse of life stirring at its edges. You paused, fingertips brushing the worn handle, grounding yourself in the tactile eloquence of this daily ritual. The stone stood unwavering, its jagged silhouette etched in the cold light, a monument to endurance, unmoved by the steady march of time or the restless wind that sought to erase your painstaking designs. Beyond the garden, faint murmurs wove through the air, the distant clink of pottery, the quiet murmur of waking voices, the long-forgotten melody of a bell tolling softly in the village. These sounds, blurred and distant, seeped through the fragile barrier between worlds, threading thin lines of warmth through the biting cold that wrapped around you like a second skin. The shadow flickered once more at the boundary of your vision, melding seamlessly with the skeletal branches and curling mist. It remained just beyond reach, an indistinct silhouette, hovering between night's retreat and the fragile promise of day. A subtle tension coiled quietly beneath your ribs, pressing softly against the slow cadence of your breath. Your fingers twitched near the iron trowel at your belt, the cool weight a muted promise that hummed beneath your skin. Yet your hand withdrew, retreating gently as a silent vow to wait, to watch, to endure without needless haste. The figure's hesitant movement, its stillness, folded into the mist, seemed to breathe with the garden itself, a slow, deliberate dance of patience, held in fragile balance. A sudden breeze breathed through the trees, stirring dry leaves into a slow, hesitant pirouette. The red petal lifted again, twirling in the chill air before settling down softly, a lone beacon of vivid color against the muted earth. It was quiet, that movement, almost too delicate to mark the stillness. You watched, breath shallow but steady, as if in that simple spiral was encoded a connection too subtle to speak aloud. You resumed your careful procession, the rake carving gentle swells in the sand, lines that blurred and softened under the teasing wind. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, a measured dialogue between your will and the earth's quiet resistance. The sound was a soft, rasping sigh that melded with the distant call of a lone crow, its sharp cry breaking briefly through the waking calm. Before dissolving into the cold, shadows stretched longer as the light shifted and waned, layering slow depths over the garden's surface. The stone cast fragmented slivers that fractured across the raked sand, slanting shadows like slow-moving fragments of forgotten time. Your gaze traced the pattern carefully, mindful of every subtle rise and fall, every tiny grain out of place in the ever-changing canvas. Suddenly, a faint creak reached your ears, the delicate sigh of weathered wood straining softly against the chill. Your head turned slowly toward the sound, senses sharpening with patient caution. At the far edge of the courtyard, where moss thickened into a deep verdant line against stone, a movement shifted beneath the fragile cloak of morning mist. The figure reappeared, stepping forward with deliberate grace. Cloaked in shadow and mist, it moved like a slow echo folded into the garden's breath. Its presence was both gentle and weighty, carrying an unspoken question wrapped in the quiet frost. You held your ground, stillness your only defense, as the cold air deepened around you. Your fingers brushed the trowel, but refrained from drawing it close, trusting the slow ritual to carry you through this uneasy communion. The warmth inside your palms blossomed faintly as you lifted your gaze to meet the figure's shadow-shrouded outline. An invitation and a challenge woven into one. The figure inclined its head slightly, the movement pregnant with meaning, yet wordless. A silent promise hovered between you. No rush, no demand, only the slow unfolding of something older than the frost, heavier than the garden's stones. As if melting into the dawn itself, the figure slowly receded, folding once more behind the skeletal branches and drifting mist. The silence that followed was vast and thick, a held breath poised on the cusp of change. Your eyes fell once again upon the red petal, steadfast and vivid against the cold earth. You felt the thread of resolve tighten within, a silent vow deepening in the quiet cold. Then, from the shadows near the ancient wall, a faint shimmer caught your attention, like a thread of light trembling in the half-darkness. The garden's secret was stirring again, slow and deliberate, and you knew the waiting was far from over. The morning light softened, casting a gentle hush across the courtyard. The red petal rested quietly at your feet, vivid against the muted frost and scattered stones. A quiet symbol, unwavering in its simple brilliance. Around you, the ancient garden breathed with a calm that seemed to settle through every worn branch and moss-covered wall. The weight of waiting, that had pressed so heavily over countless dawns lifted slightly, leaving space for something new, a slow, tender breath of possibility. You rose with deliberate care, the familiar ache in your shoulders, now a comforting echo rather than a burden. The bamboo rake lay beside you, its smooth handle cool and steady beneath your fingertips. Its presence was a silent testament to all the quiet hours spent tracing endless lines, each sweep a small prayer, a slow dance between control and surrender. As you lifted it once more, the fine grains of sand responded beneath the blade, slipping gently in soft arcs that seemed almost to hum with the memory of your touch. Beyond the garden walls, the village was stirring. Soft voices and distant footsteps wove through the crisp air, blending with the faint smoke drifting lazily from hearth fires. The scent mingled with the earth's dampness and the lingering bitterness of frost, settling deep within your lungs, warming them despite the chill. The stone before you, solid and steadfast, stood as it always had, both a challenge and a companion through the long solitude. Yet now its harsh edges seemed less forbidding, softened by the growing light and the slow unfolding of your resolve. Your gaze wandered skyward, catching the fragile dance of clouds parting to reveal thin threads of pale blue, like promises stretched just beyond reach. The skeletal branches whispered above, their brittle limbs swaying gently in the soft breath of the morning breeze. The garden held an unspoken stillness, as if it too awaited the moment to release the tension it had harbored for so long. Then, from the edge of your vision, movement stirred, not sharp or sudden, but deliberate, almost hesitant. The shadow returned, weaving through the mist like a slow, drifting thread, entwined with ancient whispers. Your fingers tightened around the rake's handle, but instead of tension, a quiet steadiness settled in your chest. The moment held no threat. It was an old presence, a patient visitor shaped by time and silence. The figure stepped forward faintly, its form outlined against the pale light, more distinct, yet still woven from hush and shadow. It hesitated, bowing its unseen head in a gesture both weighty and gentle, an unspoken greeting folded into the cold air. You met it not with fear, but with the stillness that patience had honed, the knowledge that some encounters transcend haste or judgment. Without a word, the figure seemed to merge with the garden itself, folding back into the mist and the skeletal branches, leaving behind only the faintest swirl of smoke and the lingering scent of pine embers. The air grew heavier with quiet, the fragile balance held steady, a thread unbroken between the seen and the unseen. You exhaled slowly, the breath mingling with the morning chill as your fingers released the bamboo rake. It settled finally beside you, silent and at rest. Your eyes found once more the red petal, still vivid and alone on the cold earth. It was a quiet emblem of endurance, of stories traced and lives held in the spaces between silence and sound. Around you, The garden embraced its stillness, the frost melting subtly under the softening sun, the ancient stones warming gently back to life. The delicate spirals in the sand remained, each groove a whispered testament to your perseverance, to the quiet battles waged without grand gestures or noise. You lowered yourself onto the tatami mat once more, its worn fabric cool and familiar beneath your knees. The ache in your body softened to a gentle pulse, weaving into the rhythm of the garden's slow awakening. Outside, the village took its hesitant breath, the distant bells ringing soft notes that echoed like long-forgotten songs. The world seemed to fold lightly around you, a fragile shelter woven from patient mornings, whispered promises, and a resolve that had outlasted the chill. The red petal's stubborn glow lingered in your gaze, a thread of warmth against the muted gray, and as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light through the mist, the garden held you close, its quiet breath a lullaby for the spirit. The waiting had transformed, no longer a wait, but a gentle unfolding, a soft circle drawn in sand and time. Your eyes closed slowly, the cold air fading to a tender warmth as breath deepened and heart steadied. The lines you had drawn blurred gently beneath the passing breeze, their stories folding quietly into the earth's embrace. And in that peaceful silence, the garden whispered its final secret, a promise kept in stillness, a story softly told in the slow, deliberate language of sand and stone. The day unfolded around you like a slow sigh, and the world at last felt serene.